Now, before the scourging took place, then the purpose, as we said, was for the prisoner to die, to bleed to death before they got to crucifixion because of the expense. Because the scourging was done by the Roman military, then Praxedis was there as an eyewitness, and he recorded the events. And so to make the person bleed to death, then the blood had to come to the surface. And so before Jesus' scourging, he was bent over a pillar, a stone pillar, and there he was. There was a wooden rod about this big around, and a Roman soldier would take this wooden rod and strike the back to break the blood capillaries to cause the blood to come to the surface of the skin. For the lesser of the offense, 50 were given. For the middle offense, 60. And then for the maximum offense, 70 to 75. And so before Jesus even received the whip, then this wooden rod was slammed on his back at least 70 times to bring that blood to the surface. Next came the scourging. He was stripped of his clothing, and he was chained leaning over this wooden or this steel pillar, which raised about 1 meter off the floor, and his hands were chained to his ankles as he was laid over this pillar or this stone mechanism. And then the beatings began. Praxedis, through his own eyewitness account, says that as the stripes and as the whip, the flagrum, was laid upon Jesus' back, that pieces of the bone and the steel got stuck into his flesh, and the administrator had to jerk the whip, bringing with it large pieces of flesh. Now, the whipping was done by the gladiators. This is how gladiators received extra money. If they had distinguished themselves in the arena, then Tiberius Caesar rewarded them and allowed them to make extra money. So each gladiator was given 10 swings or 10 lashes of the whip at a time. And then once one was finished with his 10, then the other one would have his 10. There were 4 of the guys. And once the 40 had been laid down, if the prisoner was still alive, they'd start over again. And if the gladiator administering his allotted stripes could kill the prisoner with his allotted stripes, then he would receive one or the two. He'd receive either 1 talent of gold, or 1 talent of silver, which is about 70 kilos of silver, or the prisoner's weight in gold. And so, needless to say, they tried their best to kill the prisoner. And because that money that they would receive from the Roman treasury would certainly be enough to buy their freedom and to live a very comfortable life for the rest of their life. And so, with the stripes that were laid upon Jesus' back, before long, Praxedis tells us that Jesus' backbone was exposed, his ribs were exposed from the back, and some of the internal organs were exposed from the back. 50 were laid upon Jesus' back, and then he was turned over, and 50 more were administered to the front. Praxedis tells us that Jesus was unrecognizable as a man. The flesh was hanging in ribbons from his body, ribs exposed, the organs exposed. And he tells us also that Jesus' face was gone because of the lashes that were laid upon it. But the amazing thing about this is that while all this was happening, Jesus did not say a single word. Nothing. Of course, we know that the only thing Jesus had to say was say, "Father, help me." And legions of angels would come and rescue him. "Father, I can't take this anymore. Please help me." But he didn't. Because I think that while this was taking place, Jesus remembered what Isaiah had to say. He was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. Chastisement of our peace was upon him. And by those stripes, then we are healed. And Jesus knew, as he looked down through the years, through the centuries, and he saw all of you sitting here at New Life AG in Chennai on this year. And he knew for a fact that if he did not go through this horror, the provision for the healing of your heart attack would never be available. That the provision for the healing of your cancer would not be made available to you. The healing of the fever for your daughter or your son would not be yours. So he had to go through this if he was going to make provisions for you. And I'm sure that he looked down through the ages and he saw you sitting here today. And he said, "Father, I love them. I love them so much that I choose for them to have provision for their diseases and for their hurts and for their pains." So as a result, Jesus didn't say a word. But at the end of the scourging, he was still alive. He had not died. And so now the Romans said, okay, he lived, so it must be the will of the gods for him to suffer crucifixion. So in order to do that, Jesus' life had to be sustained, at least until he got to the cross anyway. And so the flow of blood had to stop. And so here was Jesus with nothing on him except ribbons of hanging flesh, blood completely filled, the face gone, bleeding profusely. So the blood letting had to stop in order for him to survive to get to the cross. And so then Jesus' body, according to Pracitus, the eyewitness, was taken and it was submerged in a container filled with salt water. The pain was absolutely unimaginable. But it did stop the flow of blood. Afterwards, the Roman soldiers had their sport. Jesus was given a robe that was placed upon him, immediately adhering to this broken flesh and blood. They weaved a bunch of thorns together. The Roman emperor at that time, when he wore a crown, it was something that went on the surface of the head, very similar to what the Pope of Rome wears, this type of thing. And that's the crown of thorns. It wasn't the medieval representation of something around the crown of your head. It was like a skull cap type thing. And so that crown of thorns, that Roman crown, so to speak, was smashed down onto Jesus' head. Then these Roman soldiers, Pracitus tells us that there were at least 400 of these soldiers. For the next 8 hours, abused Jesus, blasphemed and made fun of him, with a stick, a reed stick, driving the thorns deeper into his skull, spitting on him. Can you imagine what Jesus' face, who wasn't there, looked like after being spit on by 400 men for any amount of time at all? Again, his face being smashed into the ground, into the rock floor, and the blood splattering again. But throughout that entire time of abuse by the Roman soldiers, Jesus didn't say a single word. Nothing. Again, because of his love for us. Finally, after the abuse, Jesus was taken back to his cell, passed the night, I'm sure, in agony. 6 o'clock the next morning, according to Cyrilius, who now picks up the history of the crucifixion as the court recorder for Pontius Pilate. He said that Jesus was taken about 6 o'clock in the morning, taken from his cell. Normally, the prisoner was led through the streets of Jerusalem with no clothes. In the case of Jesus, he was allowed to keep the clothes. And carrying the horizontal member of the cross, they left the place where he was confined to go to the place of crucifixion. Now, the Romans had capital punishment 4 times a year. On January 2nd, April 2nd, June 2nd, and September the 2nd. Jesus was crucified on the April 2nd date. There's also specific places throughout the empire where crucifixion or capital punishment was done during the time of Tiberius. Now later on, during the time of Caligula, then crucifixion became so popular as a form of capital punishment that they did it any place. But at this time, under Tiberius, there were only specific locations. If you were guilty of a crime of treason in Africa, then you were crucified in Cyrene, and that present-day Libya, and so it was in that area. If you were accused of treason in Europe, then you were crucified in what is now called Marseille, France. If you were guilty of treason in Italy and in Rome and Greece, in what is now Turkey, then you were crucified in Rome. If you were guilty of treason in the East, which included Judea, Cappadocia, in all of that region, then you were crucified in Jerusalem. And they call the place of crucifixion Cavra. And that's a Latin word, Cavra, which we have changed the pronunciation till now. We call this place of crucifixion Calvary. But at the time, it's Cavra. And each one of these places of crucifixion had their own Cavra. And in the Cavra, you would the vertical member of the cross would be in position at all time. It would stay there. And it was in some bedrock normally and sunk into the bedrock about half a meter. And that vertical piece would be there. And it would be arranged in a half moon type arrangement. And so you'd have on the back row, there would be a number, and then the second row and a third row and a fourth row. And so Cyrilius tells us that Jesus was crucified in the third row of this half-moon arrangement. And the Romans, because they crucified only 4 times a year for capital punishment, then if you broke the law on, let's say, January 4th, then you were convicted of January 4th, you had to wait all the way till April to get to be crucified. And you would be taken to your place of crucifixion. So normally there would be at least 40 to as many as 100 people crucified at a time. Jesus' case, there was 52. And one portion of the Word of God said Jesus was crucified between 2 malefactors. Others says 2 thieves. All would be correct because A malefactor is someone who killed a Roman official, a high-ranking official. A thief would mean someone who stole the Roman treasury, the taxes from the Roman treasury, which was considered treason against the people of Rome. And so Jesus well could have been between two thieves as well as malefactors and everyone else if he was back there in that row. Now, the families were allowed to be around the crucifixion site for the first 3 hours. Then after that, they had to leave, and only the Roman officials and the Roman guard was there. Now, when Jesus arrived at the place of crucifixion, the Capharah, then he had help carrying the vertical piece, or the horizontal piece, we know. But when he got there, then he was placed on the ground over the horizontal piece. And then Jesus being accused of treason against Caesar, then everything was nailed in place. And so first Jesus, his hands were nailed right through the junction of the wrist and the hand right there is where the nails were driven. And then the entire horizontal piece was drawn up to the vertical piece of the cross. Now, on the top of the vertical piece was a U-shaped notch, and that's where the horizontal piece went down and secured into place, and then a portion of that raised then above. And so then with Jesus hanging there by these nails on his hands, then it was time to nail the feet. But in order to secure the body of Jesus in place, because when they nail the feet, they didn't just nail it like the medieval artist tells us or the paintings show with Jesus in a vertical place, because the Romans, once the arms were extended and once the horizontal piece was attached to the vertical, then the entire body was racked like this, which made a twist of the body, and then the nails then were driven through the feet. But in order for the body to continue to be held in place so that they could drive the nails in the feet, then there was a rod, a steel, sometimes wooden, but usually steel rod that was driven through the hip that was connected to the vertical piece. Now, it didn't go through the bone, but it went right underneath the bone. And so Jesus' entire body was balancing, his raw hip bone was balancing on this rod, causing extreme pain. And then with the body held in place with that, then the spikes, the nails were driven through the feet. You know, when God created this body, he created a master machine. All of the organs in your body have nerves and so forth. The nerve endings of those body members, those organs of the body, goes to the bottom of the feet. And when you walk, then those nerves are massaged. And as those nerves are massaged, then it causes the organ of the body to function properly. This is why if a person is sick, is bedfast, that after a certain amount of time, without them being able to walk, they have everything in the world wrong with them, because the body begins to shut down when these nerve endings are not massaged. Now, if you step on a nail or something like that, and the nail penetrates the bottom of the foot, it doesn't really cause any major problems to the organs. Also, when the foot is cut off, is severed, then it doesn't cause any major problems to the rest of the body. But when the nerves are punctured from the top down, then as the spike goes through the foot and hits these nerves, the nerves just kind of explode and they're broken apart forcibly. And at that moment, in the case of Jesus, when these nails went through Jesus' feet, at the same time, instantly, then Jesus had the pain and he had the symptoms of every disease and every disorder that can affect every organ of the entire body. He didn't have the disease, but he did have, when that happened, he experienced the pain and the suffering of everything that can affect this body. At the same time, instantly, Jesus had the symptoms of a migraine headache, of a brain tumor, of cancer, of a heart attack, of any number of things that you can think of that affects every organ of your body. And it all happened at the same time. And then we have Jesus' response. The first time that Jesus has spoken since he stood before Pilate. The first time. And this is what he said. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. And he was talking to you, to me, to all of you that are sitting here, because of his love for all of you. The horrible pain and anguish that Jesus went through for the next few hours is indescribable. The crucifixion itself, the feet were probably that high off the ground. It was not like the painting show. Usually a person hangs on a cross and is crucified as much as 7 days to up to a maximum about 21 days. And how the death normally occurs is that they're consumed and eaten by wild animals, by buzzards and jackals and so forth. Once the Roman guard leaves after 8 hours. So now they're left by themselves. And especially those that are in the first two areas of treason, that they don't have this horrifying experience of trauma on the body that the maximum level does. And so they are there 14, 15, 17 days and are totally destroyed by these vultures and wild animals. In the case of Jesus, God the Father gave the maximum level of love and compassion for his son. First of all, he had to turn his back on Jesus. Jesus is the only man alive who's ever been born who had to face life without God. He's the only one, because God the Father turned his back on Jesus. He couldn't look on the sin of the world any longer, on our sin. So he turned his back on Jesus. Jesus screamed out, my God, even you have forsaken me. But then with his death came the maximum level of compassion for God the Father, because he allowed his son to die only 6 hours after he was crucified, not allowing him to go through the horror of being consumed alive by vultures. And so this is the true story about the sacrifice that he made for us. But he didn't stay dead. 3 days and 3 nights later, he came out of the tomb, resurrected, alive, and is still alive today. But this is what he did for us. And as such, Jesus knows about your heart attack. He experienced it. Jesus knows about you being rejected by your family. He knows it. He knows about time that you may have spent in prison or in jail. He was there. He knows about being betrayed by friends. He knows about ridicule. He knows about people telling lies about you. He has been there. He knows it. And as a result of that, how dare we ever say to our Lord, you just don't understand my situation. Do you really care? Lord, do you love me still? How dare we even question that, knowing what he has done for us? Yes, he does understand your situation. He's been there. He's experienced it. And so today, this morning, let's reevaluate about what he has done for us individually, and then think twice before we ever feel whether he really loves us anymore.
Welcome to Cubit Farm. Welcome.
I'm standing in the midst of God's Widow's Farm, which is actually a local phenomenon around here. And what you're seeing are the grapes that come from this farm. Before God gave us this acreage, originally 6 acres, now 10 acres, this plot of land was producing about 1 ton of produce or grapes or whatever it was producing, about 1 ton an acre. But what has made this so phenomenal is that we're now averaging between 9 and 10 tons an acre on whatever is planted. The widows get the first crop. We're supporting about 1,200 widows a month, plus their children. And it's just absolutely phenomenal what God is doing here. And it's actually beyond belief.
God's Widow's Farm is made possible by supporters of the Cubit Foundation. You can help today by visiting cubitfoundation.org and give your gift of hope today. Dr. Ron Charles has spent over 50 years researching and uncovering the truths about the life of Jesus and information that proves the historical authenticity of the Bible. Gleaned from his years of tireless work, research, ministry, and archaeological work, and watch the pages of the Bible come to life like never before. Go to cubitfoundation.org and place your order today.